Okay, it's 12:01. We promised a 1-hour event, so I think we'll kick things off now. I just want to say hello to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for Coming Out of COVID, what parents need to know about supporting kids emerging from the pandemic school year. My name is Alice Callison. I am Benchmark School's Director of Marketing and Communications, and I'm going to take us through a few housekeeping notes, and then I'm going to turn us over to our moderator, Chris Hancock. Today, we'll discuss the questions you submitted at registration with our panelists. All attendees are muted. Panelists, I'd like to ask you to remain muted also when you're not speaking. And if any attendees have a question in the course of the event, feel free to submit it through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can, and the event will end at 1 p.m. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available afterwards on our website. So I'd like to warmly welcome all of our attendees and introduce our esteemed panelists. So we have Dr. Amber West Buller, who is a clinical psychologist and the founder of POJ Solutions. After graduating from Benchmark School in 1984, Dr. Buller attended the Episcopal Academy, the University of Arizona, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, and Palo Alto University, where she earned a PhD in Clinical Psychology. Amber has worked extensively with children, young adults, parents, and caregivers as a licensed psychologist in Pennsylvania and Delaware. Amber has experience in individual therapy, family therapy, educational support, and coaching. With a background in pediatric neuropsychology, her work today focuses on assisting individuals, families, and schools. Dr. Lily Higgins is the Market Chief Medical Officer for Keystone First and AmeriHealth Caritas, Pennsylvania. She was recently appointed to the Delaware County Board of Health with the goal of establishing the county's first health department. Lily is a board-certified pediatrician with 30 years of clinical experience. Her education includes a Bachelor of Arts in Biology from Cornell University, a master's degree in nutrition from Columbia University of Physicians and Surgeons, a medical degree from Drexel University School of Medicine, and a Master of Business Administration and Medical Services Management from Johns Hopkins University. Most of her clinical career, she has served the multicultural pediatric populations in Philadelphia, and Lily is the proud mother of a Benchmark alumna. Mr. Tom Hurster is a clinical social worker on the Child and Family Support Services team at Benchmark School, a clinical social worker in private practice, and an instructor in social work at Bryn Mawr College Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research. Tom completed his undergraduate degree at Beloit College and earned his MSS at Bryn Mawr College Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research. Tom has been providing counseling and therapy services to youth and their families for 40 years and primarily works with children, adolescents, young adults, and their families, focusing particularly on anxiety, depression, impulsivity, excessive anger, self-esteem erosion, and relational difficulties, and has particular expertise in working with the emotional consequences of struggling with learning differences. Ms. Barbara Kraus-Blackney has been president of the Association of Delaware Valley Independent Schools, ADVIS, a regional association of 130 independent schools from Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland for 22 years. Barbara earned a BS in Human Resources from the University of Delaware and holds a certificate in fundraising from the University of Pennsylvania and a certificate in board governance from BoardSource. She has served on the boards of 2 area preschools and Leadership and Design and National Education Thought Leadership and Strategy Consulting Organization. Barbara is the mother of 3 independent school graduates who have all gone on to work in the field of education and related social services. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Benchmark's head of school, Chris Hancock, will moderate our panel today. Chris holds a BA in economics from Haverford College and a master's in education in school leadership from Harvard Graduate School of Education. He is currently pursuing a doctorate in educational leadership at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education and Mr. Hancock has been leading Benchmark School since June 2020. Welcome, panelists. Chris, go ahead and get us started.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you to our panelists. Welcome, everyone. As Alice said, because this is a lunchtime event, we want to be as efficient as we can with our time. So we've asked you all to submit questions if you had them in advance. So thank you for those that did. We will try to get as many of them as possible. If we do not get to your question, please reach out to us. We want to make sure we offer you responses to the things that you feel are pressing, but we did try to distill down those into a dozen or so common themes that we'll try to get through today. So before we get into the questions, I think it's important to first acknowledge for everyone on this call the taxing and in some instances tragic year it's been. As we talk today about how to move forward, I think it's important to name it, to name that struggle. It's important to identify its undeniable impact on our worlds for those around us who may be dealing with entirely different circumstances and how it's impacted them, and then learn from it enough to figure out how we safely re-enter the world, so to speak, as individuals, as parents, as a collective people. So we've got a lot of traditions to start back up again. We're trying to do that here at Benchmark at the end of the year, and I imagine a lot of schools and families are. We've got pools to swim in, we've got oceans to play in, people to hug, a lot of things we want to get back to, and all and more, probably a lot of the reasons you're joining today. So let's just get right into our first question. It comes from Sophie, Christy, and Beth. It's about socializing. And how can we help our kids how can we help them want to be social again? Any tips for helping them re-engage with their peers? Perhaps Amber, you can start us out with an answer to that.
Sure, thanks. My guess is that it will range based on the kids' ages, right? So, and a lot of kids are super anxious to be with their friends and jump back into it. So you may find that your children are already sort of eagerly engaging in that. But then there are going to be a significant number that don't know how to jump back in. And I think that you could also say the same about adults. I mean, I think we've all had a year of lack of socialization and sort of have to kind of restart ourselves too. So probably the same way you would do anything for the first time or restarting is to go slow, structure it. And a lot of this will depend again on where the age of the child is. If they're little and you really can kind of scaffold the engagements, keep it short. It's always better to end wanting more than to drag it out and them not having a good experience. And start off with things that they like. What do they want to do? Maybe be outside at a park, go for a swim. You don't want to have them sit down, look face to face and engage in these intense conversations. That wouldn't go well, but think of it as like parallel play or kicking a soccer ball around, going swimming, like something that has other activities involved. So it's not so intensely focused on the social dynamics is probably where I would suggest starting.
Thanks, Amber. Did anyone else want to jump in there or move to?
I'm happy to offer another thought. There's going to be a subgroup of kids who are going to have a hard time going from the less busy, more active schedules that they've developed. They've sort of enjoyed their downtime. They've enjoyed cocooning, to use a word, and that some of the resistance will come from resisting going back into more active schedules that offer are implied. There's a larger question there, is that maybe kids should not have as much schedule. But aside from that, one of the things that you can do is to really sort of sit down with a child and sort of map out a life plan or a weekly schedule and have them have some control and say so, and actually consciously build in downtime and kind of have them think about the bigger breadth of the week. I'm sorry about the ambient noise. I'll have to close my door in a second here. But.
No, that's okay. Don't go do it yet, because I think the second question is probably right in your wheelhouse, Tom. It's around anxiety. Sarah and Lisa have questions about helping children manage their anxiety in this ever-changing situation that we've lived in for the last 15 months. Many kids have lived in a pretty controlled environment in a lot of respects. Some kids have concerns about germs, contracting COVID. So with these restrictions loosening, and that seems to be happening at a pretty rapid rate in the last couple of weeks, any suggestions on how to help parents discuss navigating that anxiety with their children?
Yeah, I put together some thoughts. I mean, first of all, it needs to be put against a backdrop, I think, of the fact, and this has been widely written about, is that even pre-COVID, the amounts of anxiety and depression, incidence of anxiety and depressive disorders in young adults, in young people, has really been rising pretty dramatically over the last decade. So you've got that to contend with. But then there are the specific situations that have arisen with the pandemic. One of them, I think there's basically going to be two groups of kids. They're going to be the kids that we sort of touched upon already, those youth who are sort of anxious about rejoining the world and sort of getting back into socializing situations, being with larger groups of kids, having to negotiate those kinds of situations. I'm aware here at Benchmark, our fifth graders are going to be together outside of a pod next year as sixth graders, and they're already sort of anticipating, and some are anxious about what that's going to look like. Then there are going to be those kids who are sort of anxious about going back into a world that they've been told for the last year and a half is, for the most part, very threatening in terms of disease and COVID. And they've watched parents who, on the one hand, have reassured them, but on the other hand, have changed their own behaviors out of their concern. You know, it's one thing if your mother last year was bleaching, wiping down all the groceries before she brought them into the house with bleach. That was a signal that even though she was saying everything's going to be okay, that things were different. And so that's the context. Much of what I have to share, I'm hoping people are already doing. I mean, the first thing, of course, is just to be aware of the facts and to monitor the news and the reports and follow CDC guidelines. You want to limit the amount of exposure younger children have to these news reports. And I think right now, with the world opening up, that doesn't have the same prevalence as it did last January and February, where people were sort of really glued to the news. I think the most important thing is for parents to monitor their own anxiety and behavior, which it's inevitable we broadcast those fears, and trying to understandably protect our children from danger also sends messages about the outside world. Know that your child is listening to you. Kids are going to hear what their parents are saying about politics and policies around face masks and stay-at-home orders. Kids talk about this, and it can add stress for them. Also be aware that you're going to, as a parent, be somewhat more cautious over runny noses and coughs and fevers. There's a head cold going around right now with a number of people. And I know that, you know, it just sends up red flags that you wouldn't have not felt 2 years ago, and all of that. But most important is communicate openly and honestly. Be able to listen to your child's worries and express understanding about them in brief and age-appropriate ways. You know, touch base with your kids pretty regularly and ask them how they're doing, and let them know how you're feeling as well with the world opening up and moving outside. If they express fear or anxiety, validate their feelings, and your support can help them if you're honest with them and you just have sort of genuine discussions. And then the final thing is to really pay attention to the intensity, because there are some kids who will kick in from what would be developmentally appropriate anxiety in the wake of a national crisis to kids who really begin to develop something closer to an anxiety disorder, which probably needs to be then addressed. We know that when significant anxiety is addressed early, it pays all the differences in the world later on, because if it's not addressed, those things, it's like interest, it compounds itself. And so don't hesitate to kind of reach out to a professional or your pediatrician or someone and at least ask for advice about what you might be doing.
Thank you, Tom. Lily or Barbara or Amber, do you have anything else you'd like to add in there? It's pretty comprehensive. Good. Okay. Thank you, Tom. Our next question is related to vaccinations. Comes from Jennifer and Amanda. They have some questions about the COVID vaccine itself. Jennifer asks if vaccination records will be required of all school staff working in Delaware County, both the primary and secondary schools. And Amanda wants to know when the vaccine will be available to kids from age 5 to 12. Barbara, I know you and I were on a call earlier today with Jean Franklin and have been weekly for a year now. Do you want to add any perspective on that?
Sure. I think that most schools, as long as the vaccines are under emergency approval, are carefully weighing whether they will require vaccination or not for both faculty, staff, and students, for those that, are able to be vaccinated at this point. That said, I think that most are, or many at least, are hesitant to require vaccination, as well as most employers in the workplace, as far as I know, until they have full approval. Now, we do know that Pfizer has formally applied for full approval, so I'm not sure, how quickly that might happen. That said, as independent schools, we do have the ability to require vaccination if we choose to do so. I really cannot speak for what public school districts are doing. I think that they are not requiring it yet, but maybe Lily knows more about that at this moment than I do. Lily, do you have any information on that?
Right now, there's no requirement at this point, but of course, there's a lot of discussion for coming in, in September, but nothing concrete right now.
Right. Thank you. That's what I thought. And that said, even if they are required, there will need to be room for legal exemptions for either health reasons or religious observance reasons. So even if schools were to require vaccination, it will still be a situation in some cases that will need to be managed and navigated. As far as vaccines for students of the youngest age, I also attend a weekly session with Dr. David Rubin from CHOP, as well as 2 other pediatricians from elsewhere in the country. In the last session, they are predicting that that vaccine may be approved or sometime for late September initiation. So that would not, of course, mean prior to the start of school, but hopefully shortly thereafter, it will be available for that age group.
What a relief.
Yes.
So the next question is connected to, again, some of the vaccine related questions that have emerged from everybody's submissions. A few people ask about the long-term COVID effects parents could be watching out for. And if there are any concerns about side effects for young children in particular. Lily, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that question. So in the United States right now, children under 18 currently account for approximately 12 to 14% of laboratory confirmed cases right now. Since the pandemic started, more than 1.5 million adolescents ages 12 to 17 have been diagnosed with COVID-19, and more than 13,000 have been hospitalized according to the CDC data. So let me talk a little bit about the concern about long-term COVID. We're seeing that in more the adult population, and it's called by many different names. It's called long COVID, also called post-acute COVID-19, chronic COVID-19, or post-COVID syndromes. And basically, these are symptoms that develop during or after acute COVID illness, and it's continuing for more than 12 weeks. and it's not being explained by an alternate diagnosis. Some of these symptoms could include fatigue, dyspnea, chest pain, persistent coughing, headache, joint pain, insomnia, not sleeping well, anxiety, and a little bit of cognitive dysfunction and muscle ache. So they're really looking at this and really trying to understand about this long effect or long COVID symptoms. But I'm wondering if also the question also referred to something that we're seeing in children called multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, or we call it, pediatricians call it MISC. We're trying to understand the link between this MISC with COVID-19 right now. It's not really well understood. And basically, we're trying to understand why some children are at risk when they get COVID-19. They tend to be very ill with MISC, and they tend to have prolonged fever, abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea. They could get a rash. They have a bloodshot eyes. They're very tired, and trying to understand why some of our kids are getting MISC when they get COVID-19. And I think really that explains why we need to get the vaccine. You know, why it's important for our children to get the vaccine. And the question is, what are some of the side effects of the vaccine? So I want to talk about the Pfizer study. Pfizer is the only one right now that's approved between 12 and 17 years of age, and 12 to 16, of course, is approved 16 and beyond. And their study included 1,000 recipients, 2,000 recipients, and half of the recipients got the Pfizer vaccine, and half did not get the Pfizer vaccine, what they call the placebo group. And of those kids, the 2,000 kids aged 12 to 15, they were randomized to either get the vaccine or not get the vaccines. And the ones that did get the vaccines, the most common effects were basically pain in the injection site, fatigue, headache, chills, muscle pain, fever, and joint pain. But how effective was the Pfizer vaccine? It was actually 100% for those kids. Of those 1,000 vaccine recipients, there were no cases of COVID-19, while 16 were reported among the 970 placebo recipients. Right now, Moderna is doing their trial right now for 12 to 17 years of age. They currently have 3,700 adolescents enrolled. They will most likely get, in early June, be applying for FDA EUA approval. So let's talk about what they're seeing at this time. Of the kids that were getting the vaccines, and of course, half were randomized to the placebo group. After 2 doses, there were 4 cases of COVID-19 in the placebo group and none in the vaccine groups currently, according to Moderna. Currently, the data have not been published in peer-reviewed journals yet. And what are the side effects of the Moderna for this age group? Basically, the most common side effects from the vaccines were injection site pain, headache, fatigue, and chills. I do want to talk about a little bit about myocarditis, because you're hearing this in the news. There have been reports in the news about small number of teens and young adults who experience a heart inflammation, also called myocarditis, after getting the COVID-19 vaccines. These cases are appearing to be very mild, and the patients are being treated with anti-inflammatory medications and doing well. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, is currently analyzing these cases and to see if there's any link to the vaccine. This kind of ongoing monitoring by the CDC is very standard with any new vaccines to make sure that they are safe, and also to see if the number of myocarditis cases that are being reported in these young children after vaccination doesn't appear any larger than what's normally seen in the people of this age without the vaccine. And I just want to remind everyone that the reported cases of myocarditis related to COVID-19 vaccination is most likely a very rare situation, because since the vaccine has been given since December 2020, there have been 4 million adolescents have been getting this vaccine between the age 16 and 18 since December 2020, and that condition have not been reported to be associated with the vaccination during that period of time. So I just want to remind that the vaccine is very safe from the information that we have been gathering.
Thanks, Dr. Higgins. That was great. I do have a follow-up question, something that's come up from, I know some of our parents here, particularly with their youngest children, 6, 7 years old. This question about prepubescence, and does that have any impact? And you may not be able to levy any sort of medical opinion on that, but that is a common question that comes up. So for adults, I think people are able to wrap their heads around efficacy in that. But for kids who maybe haven't experienced puberty, is there any connection or concern or things to be thinking about in that regard?
This vaccines trial currently going on for that age group. It's actually, the vaccine trial goes down as young as 6 months of age currently.
Okay, that's great to know.
So the data are being gathered. So we are still looking at the data at this point. So no vaccines will be released without a peer study of looking at all this data during the trial period.
Thanks. Let's move into this question. It is one that seems to come up every year for different reasons. In this year, certainly a new wrinkle, and that's about screen time. A few parents, Diana and Lauren, have questions about it. Lots of kids obviously have had more time to be on a screen. They've been required in many instances for those schools that aren't in person to be on screen more often. Gaming has certainly gone up this year as well. The question is, how can we backtrack these kids to a more appropriate level of screen time? Amber, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, thanks. Well, first and foremost, it is very difficult. There is no easy answer. There is no quick fix on this. I'd say the best way to start, which is also very difficult, is parent modeling. If we are always on our phones, devices, computers, tablets, whatever, and we're asking our children not to be, it sort of flies in the face for them. The other piece I think we need to be really mindful of is that this is not only driven by schools, because schools want them. Now, the good news is we're moving into summertime, and I think it's a great opportunity to take a step back and get a break from them. But we also have to understand that this is how young people communicate. They are either they don't email, let's be honest. They text, they Snapchat, they whatever. So as we're trying to get them to backpedal off, I think it's really important that parents also acknowledge that this is how, I get it. This is how you communicate with your friends. Maybe we can contain friendship communication to this amount of time. The way to backpedal is going to be very different based on the age of the kids that you're trying to backpedal out of. I think if you can find ways to have family time that is no screen time, get the kids engaged in activities that are outside, that are really distracting and drawing them so that they aren't going to want to necessarily be on their devices, getting them to do these activities with friends so that they don't have to be on the devices to talk, finding family time where you guys just hang out without devices, whether it's like family game night or maybe there's an incentive to stay up later, but you have to be reading or drawing with paper and pencil. I mean, there's ways to do it, but it by no means is easy. It is not a fast fix. And I think you're going to find more success with families and parents that A, model it, and B, are acknowledge the challenges that their kids are having, because this is their way that they communicate with their peer groups. And it's also a requirement of schools. Some schools may have summer work on the IXL maths or whatever else it is. So, to say that you can have a summer without it is completely illogical, but there's no reason why you can't lose some of it and get some, downtime. And then, of course, there's all the research around sleep and how it impacts sleep, and the devices should be turned off and away from them at least a half hour before bedtime and all that kind of stuff. That probably isn't as big of a deal over the summer, but that certainly impacts kids during the school year.
Yeah, and there is plenty of research out there that would tell you too that being away from them doesn't mean, on the side of the nightstand or even in a backpack near them, right? Just the proximity of its presence keeps it engaged, and anxiety can go up, right? Who's trying to communicate with me right now? And so there is this, I think, very valid understanding that the proximity of the device does matter too, right? So getting that stuff really put away.
Totally. And a lot of kids this is my favorite. It's my alarm clock. It's how I wake up. Well, you can go to the dollar store and get an old fashioned, battery operated clock for $5, and it will be a huge game changer. I think I'm a big proponent of charging stations, where devices get put at night. They're in the kitchen, family room, wherever, but absolutely out of the kid's bedroom, because it is that constant draw of it's near me, the proximity, I need to pay attention to it. And there is something to be said, you'll find out of sight is out of mind. Like if it is away from them and they are distracted in fun and healthy activities, they'll forget about it, at least for a little bit.
You brought up another good point in there, Amber, and maybe Tom or Lily or Barbara have some thoughts on this, both as parents, as busy professionals, and as experts. But when we're sitting down at a dinner table, you mentioned modeling, Amber, right? The reflexive, sometimes subconscious or unconscious actions of our own, right? We're in the middle of a bite, we're having a conversation, we may look at our phone and put it down because we think we have a healthy relationship, but what cues is that giving those around us, particularly our kids? So I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, but my suggestion would be also as adults to try and implement something like that for yourself, to really hold yourself accountable to it.
Absolutely. It can be so consuming and shouldn't even be there near you at the dinner table, right? Take that break with your family. We've been in a situation during the pandemic where two of our adult children, well, a daughter and her husband, moved back in with us for a while. And we've even tried to maintain that at the dinner table for this group of 4 adults in our home. We're all working at home constantly. This is like time to come together and leave that, aside. It can wait.
I hear pretty regularly from kids. I as part of my practice, I run therapy groups, particularly for high school age kids. And I hear pretty regularly conversations about dinner tables where dads are supposedly the worst, but not always, where, they'll be in the middle of the conversation and they'll be looking at their cell phone and texting or monitoring something on it all the time. And when kids point it out to them, they get kind of sort of brushed away. And so you're right, Chris. I mean, it's so ubiquitous and so much a part of all of us. And, I personally fight the tendency to have to keep looking at the device. And so, but it does send a very strong message to kids that seems pretty contradictory if parents are on it all the time and you're asking them not to. Just one thing. One is that it's helpful if you think about the internet as a playground. And this is where kids play in the 21st century, at least one of the ways kids play there. And I think that at least takes away some of the adult prejudice that we sometimes attribute to it. And the behavior on that playground is not dissimilar to the behavior of the playgrounds of my youth. And so sometimes language is rough and it's not necessarily meant for adult ears. But the other thing I want to say is a hopeful sign is I did a very quick informal survey of our 6th graders. I actually said that I was going to be part of this panel and I wanted to pick their brains about something. And we were talking about what they liked about COVID and what they hated about COVID. And one of the things that many of them said that they liked about COVID is they spent way more time outside than they had before, which surprised me because I would have thought it was just the opposite. But because most of them were not allowed to see other people unless they were outside, they spent more time playing with kids outside than they had prior to COVID. Also, I think they had more downtime to play because they didn't have the same kinds of structured afternoons. And a number of them said they discovered what it was like to be in the woods by themselves. And I thought that was just a really endearing and gave me a different sense of perspective and hope. So there may be ways to build on that as well. So.
Thank you. We're going to move to summer support. We've got a couple questions sort of grouped in here. We'll start with the first one, which is just what parents can do, those who are starting to look ahead to the fall. What can they do this summer to support a successful return to school? And maybe Barbara, if you can tell me what you're hearing in the school community right now about some of those strategies.
Sure. So mostly what I'm hearing is let kids be kids this summer and play and get back into the social, connections that come from summer camps, summer activities, whether they're more structured, a camp type experience or less formal, summer vacations and pools and playing with neighborhood kids and so forth. Going back to the first question we started with, I think kids really need that. It's been a tough year. They've all felt it. Many have trepidation about engaging back in social relationships. So summer is a great, opportunity now to have some of that occurring before school starts again in the fall. That said, there's a range of summer camp activities and some could be more academically focused if needed. And certainly our schools, and I know Benchmark is excellent at helping identify those students that need that type of support. But really it's just let kids enjoy summer and play. The value of play can't be overstated.
Yeah, and for those who have lived in urban areas who haven't had the benefit of outdoor space, I think even more so, right?
Right.
And what a great segue, Barbara, into the question that has come up time and again in the last month from so many families is how do you balance that play with those that maybe are behind in reading or math due to academic loss this year? Even in the best of circumstances, and I would say here at Benchmark, I think we've done a great job, but we also need to acknowledge what the limitations of this year were. And so how do you balance those two things? Tom, do you want to levy any opinions on that?
Well, it's actually a very large question because there's a number of questions underneath it, but I'll try to just address the one specifically in front. It's a nuanced thing. I worry a little bit about the whole notion of kids being seen as behind. I'm not sure they're. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on educators across the board to sort of address what's been referred to as a learning loss, and there's inherent difficulties with that because I'm not sure that it's exactly a learning loss. Number one, that's been written about by people. A man by the name of Ron Berger has written about the fact that he thinks that the danger there is a mindset that then gets in the way of kids being able to go ahead, and there's a worry that the kids are going to be seen as somehow handicapped or in some ways hindered, or that they're going to be always playing catch up. And there's a real danger in trying to do that. And also the Brookings Institute last year showed that although they anticipated that there was going to be only 70% of the learning gains last year, they were wrong, at least in reading. The kids lost very little ground in reading when the pandemic began. With math, there was a 5 to 10% loss. And so there's reason to believe that the dire predictions may not be as true. But that said, I think that there's One other point is that there are a group of kids, and there's more than ample anecdotal evidence that a lot of kids actually thrived in remote learning. And one of the big questions for educators going forward is to figure out what are the things that really were helpful and how to sort of jump on those things and understand them and sort of implement them in terms of our work going forward. But specifically, summer has always been, some people describe it as the black hole of elementary education. And so that kids traditionally lose about 20% in math that they learn during the course of the year when they, over the course of the summer. Certainly kids who are weak readers or who don't like reading lose ground relative to what they've done in the school year. So we've always, so without giving a shameless plug for Benchmark School Summer Program, which is exceptional at addressing these issues, I would say that, you know, I agree with everything Barbara said about play, because it really has to be. And the biggest danger here is parents themselves feel some sort of mission to try to catch up when I'm not even sure catch up is needed, or in what way. But that there is a value to having kids read during the summer, and there's a value to having kids do math work. And so I think I would encourage parents to go to their teachers at their various schools and ask them what they would recommend. We use IXL here. The Benchmark math teachers have specific programs for each of the kids that they're going to recommend. And of course, we recommend that our kids read, and I think that that will help kids not necessarily gain ground. I don't think that's the issue. You just want to have them continue moving and forward over the course of the summer, as well as being able to do these other things as they enter the world again.
If you don't mind, I could jump in. You know, Chris, I think your question was, you know, either or, and I don't think it's either or. I think it's both.
Balance,
you know,
yes.
Academic and physical activity. I think it's important. And you know, a plug for Benchmark Summer Camp. All four of my children attend every summer, and they offer both the reading and then, of course, the sports and physical activity. I think, you know, re-engaging in sports and physical activity with friends has both physical and psychological health benefits for the kids. You know, when you participate in sports and physical activity, allows the youth to improve their cardiovascular health, strength, body composition, and your overall fitness. And mentally, the youth may experience benefit from the increased socialization with their friends and coaches, as well as from the return to a more structured routine. So I really think you need both. You know, exercise it help you psychologically, physical benefit, and also support your developmental growth.
Thank you. And you've just actually touched on something, actually both you and Tom have, on both psychological and social benefits. I'm actually going to jump into a question from the chat that's, I think, connected to this, particularly around this notion of lagging. And I'm just going to read it verbatim, and if anybody wants to chime in here, be great. It says, I assume there are psychological and socialization milestones that may be impacted from either the stress created by the pandemic or isolation practices. Do children generally catch up, or will there always be, quote, lagging? Said another way, if someone generally becomes an adult at age X, will that age be later because of this? And if so, can they leapfrog to where they, you know, would have been by giving them specific support or experiences? Does anyone want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, well, as I sort of alluded to, it's we don't know yet. I mean, that's the reality. Is there's certainly going to be a group of kids who took pretty big hits on this during this process. They've lost family. There's been economic insecurity. There's a group of kids I know from my public school counterparts who just don't show up. And so those kids are clearly, they're going to be residuals of that. And so it'll be it's hard to know exactly sort of what can be put into place to address what what they missed or they lost. On the same token, the argument is that we don't want to send a message that our kids are broken. That's absolutely the wrong message, because again, that puts into place a kind of mindset, and that so that one ideally would be tailoring educational and emotional interventions to the individual child. Different kids are going to need different means. I think what people are really afraid of is that with the assessments that are clearly going to happen across the board, as mandated by the Biden administration in the fall, that groups of kids are going to be targeted as needing significant remediation, and that remediation will then sort of tag them as kids who are as behind, and so the argument would be to somehow to kind of mitigate against that by really trying to give kids work that builds upon where they are rather than remediation, not trying necessarily to catch up. I don't think I'm exactly answering the question, but I did feel that it kind of goes to the whole notion of trying to really assess what it is what we're working with, because I'm not sure that I really worry that we kind of over pathologize the situation.
Amber, I just saw you unmute.
Yeah, I like everything that Tom has just said, because I think that, I think we do need to be super careful and cautious not to overly pathologize kids, and ourselves for that matter. I think that, I think the question was asking if emotionally, because we've been isolated, will there be delays in emotional growth and achieving emotional milestones? And it is a really interesting question, because I don't really think we've ever had a situation like this that we're so aware of. I know there've been pandemics over the time, but they sort of hit like this. And my knee-jerk reaction is going to be, they'll make it up. Humans are innately social creatures. And so given the time, support, and structure to engage back again, they will jump back in. But there will be kids and families, to Tom's point, that it's not so much the social isolation, it's the devastation, the family loss, the stress. Those things are almost more impactful on someone's development than a couple months away from your friends. And I'm not trying to belittle what people have gone through, but I think it's a really interesting question that the person was asking, because I don't think there's an easy answer to it.
And I would argue that the trauma literature also paints a picture here that it's certainly there's a significant number of adults, it's speculated, and I don't know if this is true for kids, because in many cases parents protect kids from the worst of this, and certainly healthcare workers are at particularly vulnerable, but they expect almost a PTSD kind of reaction where, as the pandemic recedes, and as people sort of, it's like a combat vet coming back home. They're not vigilant in the same way, but then all the stuff that they've sort of shoved aside is there. The loss, the pain, the constant worry, the sleep deprivation that adults have struggled with. And so that's I think the piece that we're most conscious of, is that we may see residuals after the fact rather relative than coming out of the trauma of the experience, but it's a result, it comes from the trauma experience that a number of people in our population have felt. So.
Thank you. Good question. I just want to be conscious of time. We have only about 10 minutes remaining. And given this is a lunch session, I imagine people are either getting hungry or need to go to a meeting. So I do want to get through these last 4 or 5 questions that people have submitted in the time remaining. So we'll jump to the next one, which is about masks this summer. And Sue asks if it's healthy to have children playing sports in hot weather in masks. This is something that has been a topic of conversation, certainly among school officials with the county health departments in the last couple of weeks alone. So Lily, do you have any advice or guidance there?
So the American Academy of Pediatrics, currently continues to encourage mask wearing for children and staff in school, childcare programs and camps, and until the COVID-19 vaccine is available for children, and uptake in the pediatric population is high enough to prevent the transmission of SARS-CoV-2. So that's the stand of the American Academy of Pediatrics. So you should be making sure that the children are wearing a well-fitted face mask. It's not too tight, it's snug, and have ability to, control the tides so it could be snug but not too tight. And also, you don't want the mask to get wet. If it does get wet, you may want to make sure your child has another mask to change into. But it's safe to wear a mask, especially cotton mask, because it's very breathable. And if the cotton mask does not work, the 100% cotton mask, you could also consider a surgical mask. But making sure they have another mask available in case the mask does get wet.
Lily, do you have any insights? We have heard from some folks about high energy, high engagement, heavy breathing activities in high humidity, in the ability to remove a mask in those instances. Can you offer any responses to that?
So there's really no danger for that child, if it's a very breathable mask, such as a 100% cotton mask or a surgical mask. And the mask does not cut off oxygen or retain carbon dioxide. I think a lot of people, the myth that you're not getting enough oxygen or you're retaining carbon dioxide. So that's a myth. So it's relatively safe as long as the mask is not wet. So that's why you may want to make sure you have a second mask available.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is related to counseling. Cecilia asked, what counseling services might be available to youth this summer, and how can parents locate counselors for kids? Amber, do you want to offer any supports there?
Yeah, sure. I think as school's winding down, if that's something that you want for your child, your best resource immediately is your school counselor, because they usually are pretty tapped into your community resources and will be able to connect families into that. There are tons of resources, but that said, people are pretty stacked up and booked. There'll be more flexibility with kids coming out of school. Providers can do more during traditional school hours. Things like insurance and out of pocket, what's the age, what's the issue, group versus individual. I mean, there's a lot of things at play that can immediately, once you hone in on those, then you can kind of start tapping into the resources. If these are things that families are interested in, I'm more than happy to try and help families navigate it. But I also know that the school counselors of wherever the children are at school also can help them navigate a lot of those issues as well, to try and connect in.
Thank you. We have 3 more questions. The first one is from Katie around student progress. And this, I think, is tangentially related to some of the topics we've talked about already. Just looking at the perspective of a school professional, Barbara, maybe you can offer an answer to her question, which is how to help support parents who have, well, maybe she's not a parent, maybe this is coming from another educator somewhere, how to support parents who have unrealistic expectations about student progress.
Right. So we have touched upon a lot of the information that should be shared with parents. But I think, the bottom line message is have faith in your kids. They will catch up, and the undue pressure, so that or the message that there's learning loss and there's something here that will follow a child through life is not helpful or healthy. How to support professionals in, working with parents to get that message across. I guess, professional development and sharing of professional, white papers, articles by a school community could be very helpful there. to share that information. And as we go further, I'm sure there will be some studies that can be documented and shared as well. But I think kids, they'll catch up. And, the one unique thing here is we all went through this as a nation and a world at the same time. And everybody's acutely aware of that, even though there, I'm sure, some inequities in various communities as to how well it could be responded to. It still has had impact, across the board.
Thank you. 2 more questions. One about student confrontations. Marie asks about recommended strategies for students who are confronted by fellow students who are vocally anti-mask or anti-vax. Tom, do you have any insights into that?
Well, I think that hopefully kids have had discussions with teachers and parents and other people about just how to handle confrontations and taunts and those kinds of teasing situations already. I think that the advice probably is not different than any other kind of confrontation. If for a younger child or a child up to a certain age, the safest thing is to say, my parents told me I need to wear a mask and that's why I'm wearing one. Or you could, an older kid could just easily just say, quip, I follow the science, what about you? I mean, so there could be a comeback kind of thing that way. But in general, I think that the idea is that you can, that a child needs to be able to feel comfortable themselves in the decision about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And that then kind of communicates. I worry a little bit though, Chris, about the other possibility, which is I worry about kids who choose for whatever reason not to be vaccinated, or their parents choose not to be vaccinated when the rest of the world is. And that's a situation that I think it will be somewhat trickier, because I suspect, at least in our population, those kids will be, I don't want to say outliers, but they'll be less frequent than the amount of kids who are vaccinated. And in terms of, and that seems to me, that's a much more nuanced kind of response. But, and those kids may need help and support in terms of knowing how to negotiate it. Although it's very possible kids will not know who is vaccinated and who isn't either, so.
Yeah, and I imagine that will be an ongoing one for several months, and maybe even years. Last question around restrictions. Adam asks how we might help the children who seem to have benefited from the restrictions this past year cope with less restrictions. I don't know, Amber, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah. So I'm wondering what they're really asking. Is it that the child's thriving with the more restrictions and are worried about the less restrictions? So I'm going to answer it as though the child is worried about functioning with less restrictions. And if that's not what they're asking, I apologize. And so to that end, I would want to understand, what is it that they're worried about? What is it that the restrictions provided them that they were able to succeed? Because a lot of these restrictions can be, to a lesser degree, continued. I again, not really understanding what they mean by restrictions. What you want to basically understand or look at is, what is it that the restrictions or what I would call scaffolding has provided? And if the kid is thriving in that environment, how do we replicate it? And, or if it's unreplicable, at lunchtime, then you got to figure out what is it that they need, right? So to me, the question feels like one out of succeeding and worry. And again, that would kind of go back to, what is the worry? What was successful? What can we replicate? And if we can't, how do we help the child to feel that they can engage without that restriction? I hope that kind of answers it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good response. I'm not too sure. I'm not sure who the person is, so I can't offer any other color there. But we are at time now. I do want to offer some parting thoughts. First of all, thank you to the panelists for taking time out of a busy day and what has undoubtedly been a busy year for all of us in our various professional lives. And to those of you who are joining the call to get some answers, I hope you have found this somewhat helpful as you enter the summer months. And as more and more restrictions clear, hopefully there is light on the horizon for everyone. I do want to close with just a bit of direction to some research that I think is particularly helpful, whether you're an adult, parent, student, however you may be engaging with life these days. Howard Stevenson, a really brilliant researcher at UPenn, offers some advice around identity-related stress, which I think we've all been coping with this year in a variety of ways. And so he talks about calculate, locate, communicate when you encounter these moments. So calculate to literally identify on a scale of 1 to 10 how stressed you are in a moment. To locate then means to pinpoint it exactly where in your body it's showing up. I think the more specific you can be with yourself, the better. And then to communicate that needs, just to recognize any self-talk you may be experiencing in that moment. You very often at this moment probably thinking like, I can't handle this, but you also may be thinking something positive, like I know I can work my way through this. But identifying those things during those 3 steps, really important. And then to breathe, to actually exhale consciously. And all of those things, calculate, locate, communicate, breathe, are really aimed at reducing your stress in a particular moment, ideally really within a minute. Because when you get in those threatening moments, you get in those anxious moments, certainly as adults, our brains go into lockdown. And the more you can relax, the more you can access what you know, the less overwhelmed you'll feel. Your decision-making opportunities become much better. And I think as adults, as educators, as parents, we can show up better for our kids in those moments too. So I will leave you with that bit of advice. Take it for what it's worth. But again, a big thank you to all of our panelists here today for taking their time and sharing their insights. If you didn't get your questions answered, I would encourage you to reach out to communications@benchmarkschool.org. Alice Callison is collecting any other questions that may be out there, and we will certainly get you answers from one of our panelists. So nobody comes away from today with any, hopefully, questions they feel got missed. So thanks again. Alice, do you want to offer anything?
I would just like to remind everyone that if they're interested in the recording of this event, I will have it up on Facebook and on our website in the Benchmark Presents area by tomorrow. So, and you could also email me at communications@benchmarkschool.org to receive the recording directly. And I'm so grateful for everyone for taking part today.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Have a great day. Thanks all.